Number 1. When I was little, my family had a weekend cottage in the mountains, not far from Stowe, Vermont. Back then, it was still to some extent the back country and quite unspoiled. Our cottage was surrounded by woods, and there was a gravel road that formed a horseshoe, where about 7 or 8 neighboring cottages were. Oftentimes, there was nobody in those cottages, and we were pretty much alone for miles. Needless to say, night time was extremely dark. One summer night, we were all sitting around on the orange shag carpeting and watching Star Trek or something, and someone knocks softly at the screen door. It's a woman, wearing a house dress and looking very sweaty and out of breath. I must have been about 7 years old and had a brother slightly older. My dad talks to her for a little while as she explains that she needs a lift down to the village. My dad, ever the good Samaritan, says, "Sure, no problem. Let me get my keys." They both live in my dad's cat glass, leaving my mom, brother, and I sitting, still with the screen door open, watching TV on this warm but pitch-black summer night. Meanwhile, my father is driving this woman down to the village, a good 30 minutes each way, and he begins to talk to her and pay closer attention to her. He notices that she is barefoot and her dress is all torn and muddy. She explains that her husband lives with her in a cabin in the woods and that they have a huge fight and she has to run away through the woods since he intends to kill her. She has lost her shoes in the woods and run through brambles and branches in her panic to escape. Now, my dad is at least 30 minutes from home, and he knows that the first house a murderous guy would encounter as he chased his wife through the woods would be our cottage, where we all still sitting around, completely oblivious, with every door and window wide open. Cell phones haven't even been dreamt of in this era, and he has no way to reach us. He drives the woman to some friend's house, urges her to call the cops, and motors back to the cottage, wondering if he's going to be greeted by our massacred corpses. It was a different era, I guess, because it never occurred to anyone to call the cops just in case. I still remember him getting home and calmly icily looking every door and sitting by the door, trying not to convey to us how scared he was. That's not even the creepiest part, though. A couple of days later, my brother and I were looking around the outside of the cottage, and we noticed hand and face marks on the back windows, where a tallish person had pressed his face against the glass. We also explored the woods over that summer, and actually found the woman's shoe stuck in the mud, as well as their utterly trashed cabin. Someone had absolutely destroyed the place, breaking every glass and picture frame, and throwing all their belongings out into the woods. That was one creepy place. We heard later that the woman had committed suicide. For years afterwards, my dad and I would often walk the dog out on the gravel road, and at the turn of the horseshoe that was closest to where these people's cabin was, we always got a really bad feeling. They were long gone, but the hairs would stick up on the back of my neck, and I would always feel watched and terrified. I always assumed my dad, a calm and rational guy, if there ever was one, didn't feel scared. But years later he confided in me that he always hated that spot and felt very bad vibes, some kind of immersion or foreboding, when we walked by there. Number 2. Almost 10 years have passed from the most terrifying experience I have ever had in my life, and I still remember everything like it was yesterday. My best friend John had just turned 17. Completely happy and ecstatic, he came that day to school to announce me that he had convinced his parents to let us spend the weekend on their little cabin near the mountain. Not that far from where we were living, just a couple of hours trip with a car. That was unexpected, I thought at the time. His parents were always overprotective, and that didn't sound like them at all. "It's gonna be awesome," he said. Actually, he kept saying that for the whole fucking day, to the point that I got frustrated a little bit. But I could see why he was so excited. A whole weekend away from our parents, just to drink beer, eat junk food, and play video games all day without anyone complaining about turning off the music or the sound on the TV. The weekend came, and John with his parents stopped by my house to pick me up. I had prepared a bag with the basics, clothes and all that. Not a lot of stuff, since it was only going to be 2 days. I jumped into their car, and John's father drove about 2 hours till we made it to the mountain. They made sure that everything was nice and safe, and his father gave us a couple of advices and rules that we had to follow, like no drinking, always answer the phone, and all that adult stuff. Finally, after the lecture, they were on their way. As we lost sight of the car on the first turn of the mountain, John immediately turned to me and asked, "You brought them, right?" I opened one of my bags and I showed him some bottles of beer that I had brought. After that, he took me to my room on the upper floor of the house so I could leave my luggage, and soon enough we were already in front of the TV, drinking and playing games. The night came before we even realized it. We must have been sitting on the floor in front of the TV for so many hours because I remember that my legs have gotten numb. I paused the game and got up, and that's when I realized that it was so dark. John asked me why I paused the game. I showed him the dark sky out of the window. I was hungry and also had to pee immediately. I went to the bathroom on the upper floor as my friend went to the kitchen to put some frozen junk food in the oven. I was peeing for more than a minute, and even when I heard that sound, I couldn't stop my bladder. It was a creaky noise that was coming from the hallway outside of the bathroom. At first, I thought that it was John, who was waiting outside for his turn to use the toilet. After all, we have been drinking a lot. I washed my hands and opened the door. John wasn't waiting in the hallway, but instead I saw him with the tip of my eye going into my bedroom. That's weird, I thought for a second. I followed him to the room. The door was half open and there was no lights on inside. What is he doing in the dark? At that moment, I was convinced that my friend was trying to pull a prank or something on me. I pushed the door to open and switched the lights on. The fucking room was empty. Not a human soul inside. I searched under the bed, in the closet, everywhere. Even the window was closed and secure. As my mind was going crazy, I heard John's voice coming from the kitchen. "Dude, calm down already," he said. "You know you're going to lose either way." I don't know for how long I was frozen with my eyes open and confused. I'm embarrassed to say this, but I haven't been more scared in my entire life. In fact, John came up eventually to see if everything was okay. I tried to explain him what happened, but of course he didn't believe me. As a pranger that I was back then, he obviously thought that I was trying to fool him or something. I am not crazy. I know what I saw, or to say the truth, I know that I saw something or someone at least. After that, I wasn't in the mood to play any games or eat anything. I just wanted to leave. I remember that we called John's parents, and thankfully they came almost right away to pick us up. My friend was mad at me for a couple of days, and I was really tired of trying to convince him that I wasn't lying. I know that I am not crazy. Nothing like that had happened to me since, so I think that's a good evidence that my brain is working just fine. The scariest part is that I still hang out with John after all these years. Not that much, but I see him from time to time. To this day, he still believes that I was trying to prank him 10 years ago, and he still visits his parents' cabin every year. At least, nothing bad happened to him so far. Number 3. Sometime, my friend had gone camping with his family. He's about 5 at this time. They had gone to the summer camp that his family had been involved with for years, and were allowed to use one of their cabins for the weekend because they were on good terms with the full-time staff. Now, the camp is divided into a few clusters of cabins, all of which were pretty old and creepy and built in the early 1930s. They'd been well maintained, but never refurbished, and with just mess windows and creaky big wooden doors, they could give anyone the creeps, especially with the winter wind blowing. My friend's family was staying in one of the cabins close to the building where the camp director worked and slept. On the second day, as it was getting darker, my friend and his older brother, who was a regular counselor there for the past few years, went for a walk which led them down a winding dirt road to another cluster of cabins. They could both tell there was something wrong, but they could not place it. My friend, several years later, told me that it felt like everything looked completely ordinary, but it was like there was just something that completely threw the vibe off. His brother would attribute it to what he noticed next. The furthest coming from the entrance had all of the windows closed. There were large wooden panels that had to be lifted up and put in the mess windows. Then he heard a loud thud, and then the lights in the cabin were on. Now, it wasn't uncommon for other cabins to be rented out by hunters in the winter, so he left it alone, even though he still had a strange vibe, and decided not to investigate further. The next morning, during breakfast, he was speaking to the camp director and casually asked him how many other cabins he was planning on renting that hunting season, and mentioned that he had noticed that another cabin was being used back towards the far side of camp. The director had a stunned look on his face, and then told him to call the police and that they weren't renting out any of the other cabins that weekend. The police showed up, and after a 2-hour standoff in the middle of the woods, ended with a man in custody. For the past 3 weeks, there had been a dangerous man hiding out in a summer camp. My friend did not know it at the time, but was later told by his brother that when they took him out, he was starving and unshaved. He had a rifle, a pistol, and a shotgun, and 2 duffel bags full of valuables that had been taken during violent break-ins over the past month in the surrounding countries. Number 4. Recently, in June 2016, I was invited to join a friend and her family at a lake in North Carolina. I arrived on Saturday morning, but all cabins were booked for the night. The group of us enjoyed the day at the lake and playing card games at one of the houses. I decided to check on any cancellations for a cabin. I went over to the office and luckily something just happened to be available. Cabin 4. Perfect. My friend and her family were in cabin 3. We needed some things from the grocery store, so 3 of us went. I was dropped off at my cabin to put my breakfast away and told them I would walk back to the house for dinner. I went in, freshened up, and took pictures inside and out. They weren't the best, and I was going to erase and try in the morning. Had dinner, enjoyed the evening, but my friend and I stayed outside at my picnic table, just talking until midnight. We went into our own cabin for the night. All alone, trying to work the TV and get showered for bed. All seemed well until I thought I had pulled the bathroom door a little shut, but not all the way. As I was showering, I opened the curtain to reach for my toothbrush and toothpaste. The door was wide open, and it caught me off guard, thinking it pulled a little shut. Okay, weird, can't remember. After the shower, I went into the bedroom to dress, but it had a strange feeling which wasn't there before. After dressing, I went back to the TV area. On the blue carpet leading from the door to where I stood in front of the TV were little faded, white round circles, about the size of a quarter. I tried to wipe them with my foot, but nothing. So I was ready to sleep, but had to force myself to go back in there to bed. I could see the TV from the bedroom, but something was so creepy in that room. It lost it all for a minute. I grabbed the sheet and pillows and headed to the couch. Finally, I fell asleep for an hour or so. I woke up just after 2:30 a.m. I felt as if something was standing there, and I knew to cover my face. I was constantly waking up every hour. Finally, 7:20 a.m. came, and I was so relieved that creepy night was over. I told my friend about it and how I wanted so badly to text her to come and stay with me. I went home that Sunday afternoon, and I was sad to have gone so early. I never retook the pictures. I was browsing through them that evening. I then noticed something I didn't see before. In the picture facing the bathroom door is ajar, and there is a hand or arm of something pushing it open. I now know it was there the whole time, and I wasn't alone that night, and it wasn't my imagination. If you enlarge the picture, there is what looks like a skeletal face. Strange things have happened to me all my life, lots to share, a lot to type. I slept with my lights on for 2 nights after seeing the picture. Number 5. I had just stretched out when a huge crack erupted from the woods. Both of us thought it was a branch or an old tree that had fallen. After he had turned off the living room light, we noticed that the light coming from the windows was abnormally strong. This sent our nerves to a new high. The light seemed to pulse several times and got so bright at the point you could have read a book by it. It couldn't have been a car, as well we were almost a mile off the road on a dirt trail. Plus, the light came in from all the windows equally. Every so often, we would hear a strange humming noise that penetrated that cabin. This lasted almost half an hour. We talked about just running out to the car and leaving, but neither one of us wanted to go outside. After the light went out, we sat on the couch, occasionally putting forth theories on what it could have been. Around 4 o'clock in the morning, there was another loud crack. We worried that the light might come back, but nothing happened. Number 6. I'm currently writing this from under my bunk bed. Let's get to who I am and what the hell happened here. I am Marisa. I'm 19 years old. I was supposed to be going on a fun camping trip with my friends at the Koa, but that's the last thing I would call this. It all started as soon as we drove into the Koa. It was deserted. We thought we had gone to the wrong one, but no. The sign said Capitola Koa. Where we were staying, we drove to check in and was greeted by this older man. He must have been around 55-60 years old. Name? The man demanded my friend Lania. Responded, Lania? Cabin 154. Up the road, take a left. We left the office and soon found our way through the Koa. It was actually rather big, but we saw no other cars. The cabin we stayed in wasn't very large. It just had 2 rooms. The first room had a queen-sized bed, and the second room had 2 pairs of bunk beds. We decided that we would take turns sleeping in the larger bed. Wait. First, let me tell you who all was there. We had exactly 5 people including me. Lania, Annie, Dusty, yeah, she's a girl, Chelsea, and I. The first person to stay in the queen bed was Chelsea. After dropping off our stuff, we left to have a button-bursting McDonald's burger dinner. As soon as we pulled up, I knew there was a big problem. The door was open. I was the last one out. I had locked it. They were all laughing about some video they saw on Instagram. They hadn't noticed. I walked to the door and peered through the crack. There was a note on the big bed. Don't look. Don't look? What the hell does that mean? I slid the note into my bra. I always keep things there. And joined the other girls. The rest of the night went on like any other camping trip. We roasted s'mores, talked about what we want to do when we got out of college, and went to bed. The layout of the room was like this. Chelsea in the queen bed. In the second room, there were 2 bunk beds, pushed against the opposite walls. I slept top bank on the left, and Lania slept bottom. On the right bank, Dusty was top and Annie was bottom. We spent the last few minutes of our day on our phones, checking notifications, texting our friends. Dusty was texting her boyfriend good night, but I was still sitting there. Once everyone had gone to bed, I hid under my sleeping bag and looked at the note. Don't look. I don't understand. I still don't understand. I heard a creaking floorboard. Everything stopped. I turned off my flashlight. Straining my body, all my muscles were tensed. Don't look. The only thing going through my head. Marisa? Chelsea? I whispered, cried. Are you okay? Chelsea asked. I was still inside my sleeping bag. Yeah, I was just... Once again, everything stopped in the millisecond before I got out of my sleeping bag. The phrase, don't look, flashed through my mind. Too late. I poked my head out. My hair staticky and standing up on its ends, sticking to my face. I wiped it out of my eyes, and the darkness around me focused. Chelsea wasn't there. She wasn't standing next to the bed, although this may sound like a typical spooky cliché movie plot. It was very real. I climbed down from the bank just to step in something warm and sticky. A putrid smell hit me. "Jesus Christ!" I yelled. Lania had woken up by now. "What?" Lania asked. "Ew! What's the smell, Marissa?" "I don't know what this is," I said, hopping off the ground to climb onto the ladder. "That's sickening. Really. Funny joke, but no," Lania said, obviously pissed off. "Seriously? Shit?" Lania asked, climbing to the butt of her bed and hopping up to the top bunk. "What?" I started to ask. "It can't be." I was cut off by Annie waking up and yelling, "What do you mean there's shit on the ground?" By this point, everyone in the cabin was awake and screaming, legs frantically kicking to get to the top bunk. Dusty turned on the light by throwing something at it, and we were finally able to see what we were screaming about. We were halfway right. Yes, there was shit on the ground. Have you heard about when something dies, all the muscles in their body relax and they just piss or poo something out because, well, the muscles had relaxed? I guess you can say that's what happened. On the ground was a dead deer. How it got in, I have no clue. By now, everyone had forgotten about poor Chelsea. "Wait!" I screamed. "What?" Dusty asked, slightly annoyed, slightly concerned. "Where is Chelsea?" I asked. This, of course, caused an uproar of teenage girls all talking over each other and arguing. In the middle of their chatter, I climbed down to the bottom rung of the ladder. I threw my shoe, which was underneath the bottom bunk, at the door so it would swing open. I then hopped over whatever was on the ground, barely missing the deer's disassembled foot. Chelsea wasn't in there. Instead, there was a note. It read this: "Hey, family emergency. Called an Uber. Don't worry. Don't look. Stay here." "You guys, I found something," I said, barely over a yell. Lania had leaped in, while Dusty and Annie were still arguing. "What does it mean?" Lania asked with concern, overwhelming her voice. "I don't know." Lania called the front desk, and our cabin got moved. It was the same format, with a big bed and then the 2 bunks. There was still no one else here. The next day, we were acting as we weren't traumatized. You're probably wondering why we stayed. Well, it's because we drove 3 hours to get here, and we thought that maybe Chelsea was coming back. She wasn't. It came to be around 11 p.m., so we started driving back to the Koa from our Danish breakfast dinner. When we arrived at the Koa, it was normal, but still no other people. We only had 2 more nights, so what would be the harm? I'll tell you what the harm was. 3 people dead, 1 missing, and a lifetime of therapy. At this point, you might have realized that Annie and Dusty like to argue. A lot. So after a 15-minute argument, it was decided that Annie would get the big bed. I got a bunk all to myself, and the other bunk was Lania on top, Dusty on bottom. Still throwing a fit, Dusty finally started to settle down. But Annie, on the other hand, was quiet. I assumed it was because she won, and it was sort of a victory silence. But it wasn't. And I'm sure you guessed why. Again, around the same time as last night, I heard stuff being thrown around, as if in a hurry to leave. Knowing not to look, this time I obeyed. I heard whimpers coming from Annie, and she, or whatever was in the bed, crawled onto the floor and then out of the door. There was a muffled scream, and the front door opened and closed. I assumed it was a dream. Until morning. Number 7. Devin was away at summer camp in Canada, where there were the usual camp stories of a ghost. One night, however, he may have encountered the real thing. My friend and I were walking just outside of the circle of cabins. It was a bright night with all the stars shining and the moon was well lit. There was a campfire going, and in one of the big cabins there was a party going on with music and so on. We were walking, and we both got a really weird feeling, as if we were being watched. We both turned toward the sea. We saw a blue figure, very tall, about 7 feet, walking through the trees. It made no sound at all. It was a bright blue and glowing figure walking through the forest. It was emitting a shimmery aura, and my friend and I both became very frightened. We shouted at whatever that thing was, and we were asking it what it was. We got no reply, of course, but we expected one. We stared as it walked away and out of our vision. We didn't dare follow it. We then ran back to the group of people at the campfire, screaming and describing what we saw. Another friend of mine claimed he was watching it from a distance not far from where we were, and was just as frightened as I was. Number 8. On Friday, July 1st, 1960, the King family drove from their home in Birmingham, Alabama, to their cabin on the shore of Lake Martin. On July 3rd, at around dusk, 9-year-old Barbara King was playing outside and was setting off fireworks with her father. She had just lit one off a burning cigarette that her father was holding, when a shot rang out and a bullet entered King's face and blew off the back of her head. The police were called, and it was ascertained that the shot came from the direction of a neighbor, 41-year-old John Wilbanks, who had a cabin about 90 meters, 300 feet away. Wilbanks denied that he fired the fatal shot, although it was determined that the shot was fired from his gun. Since he proclaimed his innocence, it's unclear if it was an accident or if he intentionally shot the little girl in the face. He was given 9 years in prison for voluntary manslaughter. Number 9. On July 10th, 1996, 45-year-old Lynn Russell picked up her 2 daughters, 9-year-old Josie and 6-year-old Megan, from school. They were last seen walking into the woods that led to their secluded cottage home in Kent, England. By 10:45 p.m., Sean Russell, husband of Lynn and the father of Josie and Megan, called the police to say that his family hadn't come home that night. The police searched the area and found the bodies of Lynn, Josie, Megan, and the family dog a short distance away from the house in a copse of trees. They had been attacked with a hammer, and their bodies had been left out in the open. The attack was so bad that Sean was initially told that they'd all been murdered. But miraculously, 9-year-old Josie survived the attack and would go on to make a remarkable recovery, although she now has impaired speech. A year after the brutal attack, a reconstruction of the crime appeared on BBC's Crime Watch UK, and a short time later, 38-year-old Michael Stone was arrested. He was first convicted in 1998, but that was overturned because a jailhouse snitch admitted that he lied while giving testimony. In 2001, he was retried, and this time he was found guilty and given 3 life sentences. There was no physical evidence connecting Stone to the crimes, and he maintains his innocence to this day. Number 10. In the summer of 1968, the Robinson family was staying in a simple log cabin on the shores of Lake Michigan in the northern woods of Goodhart, Michigan. It was a secluded cabin that couldn't be seen from the road. As evening approached on June 25, 1968, semi-automatic rifle sounds were filled through a window at family patriarch Richard Robinson. The shooter then came through the back door and shot 5 of the 6 family members in the head, then bludgeoned the youngest daughter. The bodies were then stacked to make it look like the motive for the massacre was sexual assault. After killing all the family members, the killer locked the doors and left. The bodies were found 27 days later and had deteriorated terribly in the July heat. The murders shocked the small community of Goodhart and forever changed the perception of the North Woods. It is believed that Joseph Raymond Scolaro, a business partner of Richard Robinson's, killed the family. He was charged in 1973, but when police went to arrest him, they discovered that he had killed himself with the handgun that was used in the murders. Despite the evidence against Scolaro, the case remains open. Hey there, and thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to send me the stories you want me to read to my email, and also like and comment this video. And I will see you all in my next video.